Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you who are present in the class today, the students of the Haidh Masterclass. Uh, there's two things I'd like to bring to your notice. Number one, um, we have increased the time or adjusted the time from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. We normally start at 10 and finish at 11, but we will not exceed 11:30 a.m. inshallah. There's quite a bit of information that needs to be covered. It's been 3 weeks since the start of the lessons. Now we're heading towards the last 3 weeks of the 6 weeks lessons. So we need to catch up and we need to move a bit faster with the examples that are being presented to you and cover other subjects on Haidh, Nifas, Istihaza, etc. Number one. Number two, we have a guest speaker that will join us on Thursday, inshallah. Dr. Arif Basa, famous gynecologist in Durban. Many ulama and their wives consult with him and have used his services. So he will be presenting the medical perspective on Haidh, Nifas, etc. He will give us an overview, a brief overview on the medical perspective regarding these issues to highlight to us the differences between the medical side of it and the Islamic side of it. So he will present to us briefly some points from the medical perspective, and then we will address it from an Islamic perspective. It is just to show us how doctors view menstruation and nifas and how we view from an Islamic perspective Haidh, nifas, etc. So that will happen on Thursday, inshallah. Today, the lesson will not exceed 11:30 a.m., inshallah. As a recap of last week's class on Thursday, there are basically three main core rules in regards to Haidh and menstruation that must be kept in mind. Number one, if the blood exceeds 10 days, then you will have to look at the makan, the place of habit, number one. And number two, once you establish there's a place of habit, you have to establish whether there is a nisab of 3 days or more in the makan, in the place of habit. Once you establish those two things, then all the bloods in the place of habit, the makan, will be counted as Haidh, and the rest will be counted as istihada. So the first will be counted as menstruation, the rest will be counted as dysfunctional bleeding. However, if number two, if the blood has exceeded 10 days and there is no makan, there is no place of habit, or there is a place of habit, but there is no nisab, there's no threshold of 3 days or more. For instance, there's 2 day spotting there, then you will not count anything in the place of habit as Haidh only. You will count it from the first spotting. In other words, wherever the first spotting occurred, you'll count from there onwards as Haidh and do the calculations accordingly. Number three, if the blood does not exceed 10 days, then the bloods are counted from the first spotting. The bloods are counted from the first spotting. Obviously, if it exceeds 10 days, then you will revert to your previous habit. If it exceeds 10 days, you will revert to your previous habit. Now, when you revert to your previous habit, sometimes the blood could be equal to the previous number of days, and sometimes it could change accordingly. So these are three main core rules in regards to Haidh, in regards to menstruation. Now, obviously, when we talk about blood exceeding 10 days or blood not exceeding 10 days, etc., you have to always keep in mind that there must be a tuhar before it to count all these things. If you don't have a valid tuhar, rather you have an invalid tuhar or a tuhar naqis, a deficient purity, then it could affect the outcome of the calculation. So these main core rules are subject to the condition that a valid tuhar has occurred before it. However, if an invalid tuhar has occurred before it, it is possible to change the calculation and to affect the final calculation. So this is a recap to the last class. Then we looked at some examples in those three conditions, and then we look at other examples where there was a nisab in the place of habit, and how it affected the calculation. We looked actually we looked at an example where there was no nisab in the place of habit and how it affects the calculation. Then we looked at examples where there is a nisab in the place of habit, but you don't really see a difference because it's equal to the previous number. And then we looked at examples where there was a nisab and then it changed, it reduced, etc. And that is where you saw the difference in terms of number. It is not the same as the previous number. So those are some examples that we looked and discussed in the last lesson. So question is, when counting a tuhar habit, does it also have to be counted by the minute? Yes. So when it comes to haidh and menstruation, you count everything by time. Now, when we're talking about 15, a 15-day tuhar period, you have to count from the last haidh and menstruation cycle. So you can't say, you know what, for instance, you ended on day 10 at midday. Now you must count from day 11 at midday. No, you'll count from on the 10th day at midday to the next midday as one complete day and night. So that's how you'll calculate it. So today we're going to look at seven different examples. These are examples where the blood doesn't exceed 10 days, right? So the example is a habitual woman spots for 5 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit. Then she is clean for 55 days. And then she spots for 9 days. Look at the calendar. So the first 5 days of the calendar month, she spots, then she's clean for the rest of the month, and then she's clean for the following month. In total, she is clean for 55 days, like is a habit. However, in the following month, the last month, instead of spotting 5 days at the start of the month, she now spots for 9 days at the start of the month. So this is clearly an example where the blood doesn't exceed 10 days. So the habit will change provided that a valid tuhar has occurred before it, and clearly here a valid tuhar has occurred before it. So the number has changed or increased from 5 to 9 days. However, the place of habit remains the same. So what you will realize is that the place of habit hasn't changed, rather it has shifted, or rather it has increased. So technically in the discussion, when it has moved fully, then we say the place of habit has changed. Here we'll say the place of habit has increased or the place of habit has shifted, right? So here we're only going to look at the third rule. We're not going to look at the first two rules because this is not a case of blood exceeding 10 days. And what's the third rule? The third rule is that if it hasn't exceeded 10 days, then you'll count bloods from the first spotting. And that's the rule here. So the result is the blood has not exceeded 10 days. The habitual number of haidh changes to 9 days within the place of habit, provided that it is followed by a valid purity. The place of habit has not actually changed. So it's simply increased and shifted. Let's look at the same example in terms of numbers. 55 days tuhar, 5 days of bloods, 55 days of tuhar, and 9 days of bloods. So when you look at establishing the habit, we look at the last numbers. So here it is 9. It hasn't exceeded 10 days. So usually that's not a problem. So if you look at the B numbers, we've got 5B before that, and now we've got 9B. So there's clearly a shift, and there's clearly an increase here. So we'll take that as a valid increase, provided that a valid tuhar has appeared before it. And now when we look at the tuhar, uh, the usual habit is 55 days, like the last time, and here it is 55 again. Before the 55 is 5b, after the 55 there's 9b. We don't have invalid bloods here mixed with the 55t, and this has occurred between two valid bloods, between two hays, a haze before it and a haze after it. So clearly this is a valid tuhar. When you've got a valid tuhar, and you've got bloods thereafter that do not exceed 10 days, you will count the last number as the valid habit. So the habit has actually changed from 5b to 9b, and the tuhar hasn't been affected in any way with any invalid bloods, or with any increase or decrease. So the tuhar remains the same as 55t. Let's look at another example. A habitual woman spots for 5 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit. Then she is clean for 50 days. Then she spots for 10 days. So similar to the previous example, was a slight change in it. So at the start of the month, she spots 5 days, and then she's usually clean for 55 days. But now she's clean for 50 days only. And then in the second month, towards the end of the month, she spots for 5 days. In other words, she now has early blood. So, she usually spots after 55, but then when she spots after 50, it means that it's clearly early bloods. But uh, 5 days she spots before at the end of the month, and 5 days at the start of the following month. So the first thing you have to determine, has this exceeded 10 days or not? No, it hasn't exceeded 10 days. What's the rule? Number 3 rule. If it hasn't exceeded 10 days, you count from the first spotting. So what has happened here? The result is the blood has not exceeded 10 days. The habitual number of haze changes to 10 days. In this case, although the haze is counted from day 51 of the tuhar to day 60, 5 days before the place of habit and 5 days within the place of habit, the place of habit has not actually changed. So here, we know we count it from the first spotting. We've got bloods in the place of habit. So we're not going to say that the place of habit has changed. We're going to say it has shifted, right? It's come earlier now, and this is the number. So it's actually changed from how many days? From 5. In terms of number, it has changed from 5 to 10. And in terms of place, the place of habit has shifted. From a technical point of view, it doesn't make any difference whether you say it's changed or whether you say it's shifted. It's just to give you an explanation as to what has happened. And at the end of the day, realistically speaking, the place of habit has changed. Right? It's just that we're just saying that instead of it fully changing, it has either increased, decreased, or it just shifted from where it was, but it is around the same place of habit with the changes. Okay, let's look at this example in terms of numbers: 55t, 5b, 50t, and 10b. Right? So again, we look at the last number, it hasn't exceeded 10 days. We follow the third rule: count from the first spotting, provided that is a valid tuhar before it. We look at the tuhar there, it's 50t. On either side of the tuhar, we got 5b and 10b. There's no invalid bloods here, and it has occurred between two valid bloods, which is two haze, a haze before it and a haze after it. So we count it as a valid tuhar. This will mean that the habit has changed from 5b to now 10b, and the tuhar has also changed. In other words, it has decreased from 55t to 50t. So the result is 10b, 50t. Now we look at a third example. A habitual woman spots for 5 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit. Then she is clean for 54 days. Then she spots for 8 days. So again, look at the calendar there. She spots at the 5 days at the start of the month. Then she's clean for usually 55, but this time she's clean for 54, and then she spots. This tells you that this is a case of early bloods. But if it's a case of early bloods, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to look at the place of habit. You'll only look at the place of habit when it exceeds 10 days. That rule only applies to when the blood exceeds 10 days. If it doesn't, you count from the first spotting. Like in this case, she spots for 8 days, you'll count it from the first spotting, provided that there is a valid tuhar before it. There's no invalid bloods, etc. here, or no tuhr naqis to affect the calculation. So just let me throw a curveball here. If let's say she had if you look at the second calendar, if she had a spotting on, let's say, the 25th of that month, right? She just spotted one day on the 25th of that month, and then everything is the same as is on the calendar. So what you will have here, you'll have a case of tuhre naqis, right? You'll have a case of tuhre naqis because now you're going to count the bloods not from day 30, you're going to count the bloods from day 25. And obviously, this now occurs within a 15-day tuhre naqis period. So when you do that, the blood will exceed 10 days. And when the blood exceeds 10 days, what's the first thing you do? You look at the place of habit and you see whether there's a nisab there or not. And clearly, there is a nisab here. And the, there is a nisab equivalent uh, to the last bloods at the beginning of the month. So then in that case, you would have counted only the first 5 days of the third month as hays and the rest as istihada. You will count day 6, 7 of the third month, and then in the previous month, day 30, and then from the spotting of day 25 of the second month, you'll count all that as istihada. But that's not the case here. Here we've got a valid tuhar before it, and everything will count from day 30 onwards from the first spotting. So you see that one day of spotting, how it can change everything, and it can affect the calculation. When looking at place of habit, do we use the solar or lunar calendar? If lunar calendar, if we're counting after Maghrib, is it counted as the next day? As the next day starts after Maghrib. Okay, a common misconception is that you work from Maghrib to Maghrib. That's not the case. You work by hours. Like we discussed in the first lesson, you work by hours. So if you spotted before Maghrib, you will have to end your first day calculation tomorrow before Maghrib. You don't work with Maghrib to Maghrib. That's a totally incorrect misunderstanding and conception and misconception. So you will count it by hours. So it's not about a solar calendar. It's not about a lunar calendar. It's about hours, regardless of what calendar you use. So as you can see here, we're just using a 30-day calendar to show you the example. But it doesn't work like that. It works by hours. So you calculate by hours. So in this example, the blood has not exceeded 10 days. The habitual number of hays changes to 8 days. In this case, although the hays is counted from day 55 of the tuhar to day 62, the place of habit has not actually changed. So again, we're just saying it has increased or it has shifted, but realistically speaking, it has actually changed. Let's look at this example in terms of numbers: 55T, 5B, 54T, and 8B. All right. So we've got two bloods here and two tuhars here. We look at the last one, 8. We'll take that as a valid change because it hasn't exceeded 10 days and we'll count it from the first spotting, provided there is a valid tuhar before it. So how do we determine a valid tuhar again? Must be 15 days or more, must not be mixed with invalid blood, and must occur between two valid bloods. So here it's clearly more than 15. There's no invalid bloods here. There's no like a extra 1B somewhere. And it has occurred between two valid bloods, two hays, a hays before it, 5B, and a hays after it. So we'll count this change from 5B to 8B as her new habit, 8B. And when we do that, automatically we'll count the last tuhar of the last tuhar or the tuhar in between that as the her habit. So it will be 55T. What has changed? The tuhar has changed from 55T to 54T. Okay, let's look at another example. A habitual woman spots for 5 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit. Then she is clean for 50 days. Then she spots for 7 days. So, same example, 5 at the start. She's usually clean for 55, but now she's clean for 50. And then she has obviously early spotting, early bloods, and she spots for how many days? 7 days, right? So we know it hasn't exceeded 10 days. Count from the first spotting, everything is counted as haze. Now, if you're not actually going to pay any attention to the place of habit here. Why? Because it hasn't exceeded 10 days. But should you have, let's say, invalid blood or a tohre naqis situation, deficient purity situation. So let's say she had one spotting on day 20 of the second calendar, and then the spotting is as is on the calendar. So we'll have to count from that day onwards. And when we do that, the blood would have exceeded 10 days. And then what's the rule? If it exceeds 10 days, you look at the place of habit. In this case, there's only 2 days in the place of habit. So when we don't have a nisab, a threshold of 3 days or more in the place of habit, again, what you'll do, you will count from the first spotting. You will count from the first spotting. So in that case, we would have counted from day 20 onwards. And what do? You follow the last habit in terms of number. So then it would have changed from 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll have 5 days of habits there. So you see how that one day of spotting again can change the whole calculation around, even though there's no nisab in the place of habit. But in this case, it's simply early bloods, 7 days of spotting. You count from the first spotting, provided there's a valid tuhar before it. So the result is the blood has not exceeded 10 days. The habitual number of hays changes to 7 days, and the place of habit changes from day 51 of the tuhar to day 57. In this case, a nisab of 3 days exists before the place of habit, but a nisab does not exist in the place of habit. Only 2 days spotting in the place of habit or after the place of habit. This is just to highlight to you that, look, when you look at place of habits here, they make no difference and does not affect the calculation in any way. You still count from the first spotting. Okay, same example on the calendar. Let's look at it in terms of numbers: 55T, 5B, 50T, and 7B. So again, the blood hasn't exceeded 10 days. Count from the first spotting. If there's a valid tuhar before it, and clearly there is, it's 15 days or more, it's not mixed with invalid bloods, and it has occurred between 2 valid bloods, 2 hays. So we'll count the change from 5B to 7B. That's the new habit of hays. And because we counted that tuhar as valid, it has now changed from 55T to 50T. Let's look at the fifth example. Remember, these examples are very important for you to understand the rules. If you don't have these examples, it's very difficult to understand the rules. And we're coming towards the end of some of these examples and jumping into other examples. A habitual woman spots for 5 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit. Then she is clean for 58 days. And then she spots for 3 days. So same as before, 5 days at the start of the month, the rest of the month, and the following month, she's usually clean for 55, but now she is clean for 58. Immediately, what does that tell you? There's a shift in the place of habit because the tuhar has increased. And then she spots for 3 days, day 4, 5, and 6 of the third calendar month. So now, rule is, if it doesn't exceed 10 days, count from the first spotting. So we're counting it from the first spotting, 4, 5, and 6. So what has happened here? The place of habit has shifted. Number one, it's around the same place of habit, but it's shifted. And the number has changed from 5 to actually 3 now. Why? Because it hasn't exceeded 10 days and there's a valid tuhar before it. The result is the blood has not exceeded 10 days. The habitual number of hays changes to 3 days. And the place of habit changes from day 59 of the tuhar to day 61. In this case, a nisab of 3 days does not exist in the place of habit, only 2 days spotting in the place of habit. or after the place of habit, only 1 day spotting after the place of habit. Again, this is just to highlight to you. You start looking at place of habits doesn't make a difference to the calculation in any way. You count from the first spotting because it has not exceeded 10 days. Again, throw a curveball here. If, let's say, she spotted on date, let's say day 25 of the previous month, she had 1 day of spotting there only. And then the calendar is as the same 4, 5, and 6. Again, what situation you got here? You got a case of tuhre naqis where the blood has clearly exceeded 10 days and hasn't gone more than 15 days. When you look at that principle, then you combine all the bloods from the start till the end, and only the bloods in the beginning you will count as haze and follow the previous habit in terms of number. So we would have counted 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29, those 5 days as haze, and we would have counted the rest as istihada. So if that was the case, you would get a change in terms of the tuhar habit, and you will also get a change in terms of the place of habit. But that's not the case. That 1 day of blood hasn't occurred yet. So we count everything from the start. Same example in terms of numbers: 55T, 5B, 58T, and 3B. You follow the last number, it hasn't exceeded 10 days. If there's a valid tohar before it, clearly there is 1 year with all those three conditions, being more than 15 days, not mixed with any invalid bloods, and has occurred between two valid bloods. So it has changed from 5B to 3B, and the tohar has also increased from 55T to 58T. That is the valid tohar habit. Let's look at the sixth example. A habitual woman spots for 5 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit. Then she is clean for 64 days. Then she spots for 7 days. So first calendar 5 days, she's usually clean for 55, but now 64. Immediately we know that there's an increase in tuhar. When there's an increase in tuhar, there's potentially a change of place in habit. Place of habit. So the place of habit has clearly changed here. She has spotted for 7 days from days 10 of the third calendar onwards. There's no spotting from day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the third calendar. So clearly no place of habit here. So when that happens, either way, we're still going to count from the first spotting. So the habit, the place of habit has actually changed, yeah? And the number has actually increased from 5 to 7. When there's a valid tohar before it. If you throw another curveball and you say, listen, if there was a spotting, let's say at the 5th of the month, the third calendar month, then we'll count everything from that point onwards till day 16. And then we would clearly get an increase or bloods exceeding 10 days, and then look at the Tuhar Naqis Masla and count from day 5 onwards, the day 5, day 6, day 7, day 8, and day 9 as her days of haze, and the rest 10 onwards will be counted as istihada. So that's why this condition of it of having a valid tuhar before it is very important. Otherwise, a tuhar naqis could affect the whole calculation. So the result is the blood has not exceeded 10 days. The habitual number of haze changes to 7 days, and the place of habit changes from day 65 of the tuhar to day 71. In this case, a nisab of 3 days does not exist in the place of habit or before or after the place of habit. So nisab, place of habit and nisab doesn't play a role here in any way because there's no excess bloods here. Those that are joining the class now and haven't listened to the first 6 sessions, it is advised that you listen to those sessions first, because you won't understand these sessions without understanding those rules. And then the same example on the calendar in terms of number: 55T, 5B, 64T, and 7B. Same as the last situation, you'll take the last number as the habit, provided a valid tuhar preceded it. Here, clearly, it fulfills all those conditions. So the habit has changed to 7B, and the tuhar has clearly increased to 64T. If the blood exceeds 10 days, how do we establish previous habit? Is it just last month's habit? So when the blood exceeds 10 days, like I explained previously, it's an abnormal situation. In an abnormal situation, you follow the normal situation. What is the normal situation? It is your last valid habit. So if your last valid habit was 5 days, you will work with 5 days in this case, provided that there is no place of habit and there's no nisab in the place of habit. If that's the case, you'll count from the first spotting and follow the last number, the last valid number, which in this example is 5 days. Okay, let's look at the last example before we move to another section. A habitual woman spots for 7 days and is clean for 55 days. In the following month, she spots for 5 days in the place of habit, and then she is clean for 64 days, then she spots for 11 days. So 5 at the start, usually clean for 55, now she's clean for 64. Same as the last example, only difference is now she spots for 11 days. So all the examples we looked at so far, there was no excess bloods, right? Everything was under 10 days. This is a case of excess blood where it exceeds 10 days, right? So from day 10 of the third calendar month onwards, she spots, all right, and then the spotting continues right up till day 20. Now, obviously, you'll have to look at hours. And in our example, this is an example where it has exceeded the 10-day limit into 11 days. So what's the rule there? When it exceeds that, you look at place of habit. Clearly, there isn't a place of habit because the tuhar has increased. So looking at a nisab or threshold is not applicable. What do? You count from the first spotting. The first spotting from day 10 onwards. And when you're counting from the first spotting, because you got a case of excess bloods, she will have to follow the previous habit in terms of number. So the first 5 days from day 10 onwards of the third calendar month will be counted as haidh. The rest will be counted as istihada. Right? So you count those first 5 days as haidh, the rest as istihada. Now, although this is saying that the blood hasn't exceeded 10 days, technically it has exceeded 10 days, but in terms of number, it hasn't exceeded 10 days in terms of the calculation of haidh. So the blood has exceeded 10 days in terms of a tuhr naqis, a deficient purity. She reverts to her previous habit of haidh. The habitual number of haidh does not change and remains 5 days, but the place of habit changes from day 65 of the tuhar to day 69. In this case, a nisab of 3 days does not exist in the place of habit before or after the place of habit. So just to highlight on the question occurred previously, that even though we are not following the when the blood doesn't exceed 10 days, we count from the first spotting, all right? But when the blood exceeds 10 days, there's no place of habit, there's no nisab in the place of habit. You'll count from the first spotting, but you will also follow the previous number, the previous valid number of haidh, because that is the rule. When it exceeds 10 days, you go with what is normal, and that is the previous number. Looking at this example in terms of numbers, 55T, 5B, 64T, and 11B. So, when you got an 11B situation, you got a case of excess bloods. And now, the first question or the first rules that you have to look at is the first two rules. Is there a place of habit or not? And if there is there nisab in the place of habit or not? So clearly, the habit of tuhar is 55. She usually spots after 55, but now she's spotting after 64. So the place of habit has actually increased. So there is no looking at the place of habit. And therefore a threshold or a nisab would not apply. So what do? You count from the first spotting. How many days do you count from the first spotting? You'll follow the last number because that was the last valid number, and therefore the first of the 11 days will be first 5 days of the 11 days will be counted as haidh, and the rest will be istihada. So at the start is haidh, at the end is istihada. So now the 64T, it has appeared between it hasn't been mixed with any invalid bloods, because now the 5B is actually counted at the start of the 11B, not at the end. So it has occurred between two valid hays, 5B and the 5B after it. Therefore, the tuhar has also changed from 55T to 64T. That brings us to the end of these 11 examples where we discuss where there's no place of no nisab in the place of habit, and when the nisab is equivalent to the previous number, you don't actually see a change, and then when the nisab is not equivalent to the previous number, and then that is where you will see the real change. And these examples that we looked at were examples where the blood did not exceed 10 days, and you count from the first spotting, provided that a valid tuhar preceded it. If there's any further questions on this part of the program, I can take them now, and then we'll move on to the other parts of the program. Okay, all the rules discussed until now were rules in regards to uh, a habitual woman, and in some cases, a beginner woman. Uh, so basically, there's a start, but there's a point in a woman's life where uh, the rules of haze and menstruation end. She doesn't count anything further on. So when does that apply? So the end of a haze is established when a woman reaches the menopausal age of 55 lunar years. And this is equivalent to 53 solar years and 4 months. The fatwa is given on this view. So we know the starting age for a woman to experience a valid haze is what age? 9 years of age. So she can possibly experience haze from the age of 9 right up till 55. And here we're talking about lunar years, right? In terms of solar years, this would be equivalent to 53 solar years and 4 months. 53 solar years and 4 months. This is the fatwa, this is the view. So let's look at an example. In the case of divorce, if a woman does not spot and has not reached the menopausal age of 55 lunar years, her iddah period cannot expire except with a haze cycle or by inducing it. So here's the rule. If a husband issues talaq and divorce to his wife, she has to observe an iddah period, right? Whether it was one talaq, whether it was two talaqs, whether it was three talaqs, she has to observe an iddah period, a waiting period, until she can remarry again, all right? So let's say she is 45 years of age in terms of lunar years, or let's say she is 50 years in terms of lunar years, and her husband unfortunately issued her with one, two, or three talaqs. Right now, she has to obviously observe the iddah period. However, she does not spot regularly. She does not experience a flow regularly. 6 months has passed, or 10 months has passed, and she hasn't experienced a haze as yet. How does she count her iddah period? Now, if she is a menstruating woman, in other words, she has not been classified as menopausal as yet, right? She hasn't reached the menopausal age as yet. She has to count her cycle, and she has to count it by menstruation. So it has to be 3 menstrual cycles, 3 haze cycles. So now what are we going to tell her? We're going to tell her wait 10 months for the first cycle, and then wait another 10 months for the second cycle, so on and so forth. It's going to be a very lengthy period for her. So the rule is, because she is classified as a habitual woman, a mu'tada, right? uh, and she is a haiza, obviously, she will have to somehow count it by menstruation. How does she do that? She must go to a doctor. She must consult with the doctor and try and induce that cycle so that she can count it. So, even if a woman, for instance, uh, let's say she has other commitments and she can only take off, let's say, from madrasa or from school for 2 months because of her divorce situation, she can again consult the doctor and induce her cycle and regulate it. So we know a cycle has to be a minimum of 3 days. So she could regulate three menstrual cycles and have it very short between one another. 3 days menses, 15 days to her, 3 days, etc. And then regulate it accordingly. It will work out more or less around 1.5 months. So that is permissible for her to do. That is allowed for her to do. And in fact, in this case here, she will, because she is not classified as a menopausal woman, she still has to count by menstrual cycles, and she has to induce it to do so. Yes, there is a valid opinion that if this carries on for 1 year and then she doesn't experience a menstrual cycle, then some muftis have given fatwa that because this is now over 1 year, she can consider the period as passed and fulfilled. But that now you'll have to get an opinion exclusively from a mufti. In a normal situation and circumstance, she will have to induce it because she has not reached the menopausal age as yet. Right? Now, the other point is it possible for a menopausal woman to experience a haze and a menstruation after being classified and categorized as a menopausal woman? So let's say we've got a woman that is 55 years of age in terms of lunar years, and even in terms of solar years, she's 53 years and 4 months. And then she starts spotting, right? She starts spotting. Do we say, listen, all the spotting that you see after this age is not counted, or are there some exceptions and exclusions? So the answer to that is there are some exceptions and exclusions. The first is that if she spots red or black. Now, you see, this is one of the only situations where a color has been specified. In terms of a habitual woman in normal circumstances, colors make no difference. All colors are counted as haze with the exception of white colors of blood or white streaks. In the case of a menopausal woman, this is the only time we look at colors. And why do we look at colors? Is because she has passed that period, and we have to look at the strongest indication of blood to count it as haze and menstruation. So in this case, the fuqaha, the jurists, have stipulated red and black colors of blood for a menopausal woman. If after this age she spots these two colors, one of these two colors, then we say, listen, although you have been classified as a menopausal woman, it can still be counted as haze. Two conditions: must be either red or black. And the second condition, it must be a minimum of 3 days. In other words, it must be valid blood. We have to have valid blood to count it as haze. If that's the case, we say, listen, the rules of menstruation still apply to you. However, if she spots any other color besides red or black, let's say she spots pink, let's say she spots yellow, etc., in that case, we say, listen, for you, this is not counted as haze. For you, it is only counted as haze if it is red or black and it reaches a minimum of 3 days. Right? However, if a woman spots pure red or black after reaching the menopausal age of 55 lunar years, it will be counted as haze if it reaches the nisab, a minimum of 3 days, that is valid blood. This is the preferred view, and fatwa is given on this view. So there's an age, it ends, but it can possibly be counted as haze provided it meets these two conditions of colors and it being reaching a minimum of 3 days. Okay, now let's look at nifas, right? We discussed nifas previously, just refreshing one rule and one extra view. Imam Abu Yusuf is of the view that the rules of nifas are applicable when most of the child exits the farj, the vagina, the inner lips of the labia minora. So when 51% or more of the child exits, we say, listen, the blood that flows thereafter is counted as nifas. All the bloods before that is counted as istihada. This is the most authentic view. On the other hand, Imam Muhammad has a view that the rules of nifas are applicable when the child completely exits the farj, the vagina, the inner lips of the labia minora. He has a different view. He says, no, nothing is counted until the child fully exits, until the child is fully taken out. Only the thereafter, the blood that flows will be nifas. Prior to that, everything is istihada. But the authentic view is which view? Imam Abu Yusuf's view. When majority of the child exits, the blood that flows thereafter will be nifas. And that is the view that we follow, and that is the correct view. Okay, like we had three core principles and rules in terms of calculating haze. Now there are two rules in terms of calculating nifas. Number one, if the blood exceeds 40 days, the nifas habit does not change. She reverts to her previous nifas habit. The blood in excess of the habit will be istihada. Number one. So just similar to the concept of haze, when it exceeds a 10-day period, here when it exceeds a 40-day period, the habit doesn't change. What do? You follow your last habit. This is an abnormal situation, you follow the normal situation. And the rest of the bloods will be counted as istihada, number one. Number two, if the blood does not exceed 40 days, the nifas habit will change according to the bloods seen within the 40 days. Right? So just similar to the concept of haze, when it doesn't exceed 10 days and is within the accepted period of valid bloods, you will count everything within that period as haze. Similarly here in nifas, when it is within the accepted period, within valid bloods of 40 days and it hasn't exceeded 10 days, you count everything within that period as valid bloods, and the habit will change or remain the same accordingly. So if last time it was 20 days and this time it is 20 days, so it stays the same. But if this time is 25 days, it will change accordingly. So number one, if it exceeds 10 days, you follow your last habit. If it doesn't exceed 10 days and it's within the 40-day period, you will count all those days within that period as nifas, and your habit will change accordingly. Okay, let's look at some examples. This is an example where the blood exceeds 40 days in the case of nifas. So a habitual woman, in other words, this is not her first child, right? This is her second, third child, etc. A habitual woman spots for 20 days. When she gave birth the next time, she spots for 10 days. Then she is clean for 20 days. And then she spots for 11 days. So let's look at the calendar there. You see the footprints there. That is indication of birth, right? This time she spots right up till day 10 of the 40-day period. Last time she spotted 20 days. This time it's only 10 days. And then she's clean for the rest of the month. She's clean for 20 days. She saw nothing. So now, what would she do? Day 10, she'll make ghusl and she'll continue as normal because now there's no spotting day after. And she'll observe salah, she'll observe fast, she'll do everything. But then the start of the next month, day 31 of the next month, is still within the 40-day nifas period. She starts spotting. Now she knows, oh, you know what? Things have changed. And this whole period before that is actually counted as nifas. Right? So salahs won't be counted. Obviously, there's no repetition for it. But in terms of fast, she'll have to determine if she kept any Ramadan fast or any Nafil fast in that period of time, whether it was Monday, Thursday fast, or whether it was, Islamic months, you're looking at 13, 14, 15, the white days, etc. If she did any of those things in terms of fasting, she'll have to repeat them because now she knows these bloods are counted within the period. However, remember, this is still an observation period. right? Still an observation period. So now she spots there right till day 40. In fact, it goes over day 40. It exceeded 40 days. So now we've got a situation of remember any bloods that you experience within that 40-day period, or any tuhars uh, that you experience within that 40-day period, everything is counted as one. So from day one right up till the last bloods, you'll count everything. And now the bloods have clearly exceeded the 40-day period. What's the rule? When it exceeds 40 days, you follow your last habit. You follow your last habit. So what was the last habit? The last habit was 20 days, but at the start she only spotted 10 days. So we have to add 10 more days to make it 20. And the full nifas period will be counted from day 1 of the spotting till day 20 from the first spotting. So this is an example again where the hair started with bloods but ended in tuhar, right? So she follows her last habit because it's exceeded 40 days. Result is the entire period is counted as one continuous flow of blood, as a deficient purity to naqis combines the bloods as one blood. So remember, even though you got 15 days tuhar in between, it is not actually counted as a valid tuhar within a nifas. Everything within a nifas is combined. A tuhar within a nifas does not separate bloods. So as it exceeds 40 days, she reverts to her previous habit of 20 days, even though it ended in purity to her. The 21 days in excess of a habit are days of istihada. So if you look at the second calendar there, day 21 to day 11, all right, those will be counted as istihada, right? Those will be counted as istihada. So now, retrospectively, on day 1 of the second month, she stopped reading salah, or she stopped fasting because she realized, you know what, this is now blood within the period of nifas, and this is actually nifas. But then retrospectively, only on day 41, she realized that, you know what, it wasn't actually days of nifas. So she didn't fast, or she didn't perform salah on those days. She didn't fast on those days, thinking that this has changed. So retrospectively, what she has to do now, she on day 1 she thought she has to repeat certain fasts in between, but then she realized afterwards that, you know what, there's a change here, and I may have to keep some, may not have to keep some. But the salahs and the fasts that I didn't observe from day 1 of the second month's calendar, I have to now observe them and keep them again. So you see how the calculation can change, and how the rulings in terms of observing the salah and observing the fast can change just by that one day of blood exceeding the 40-day period. If she knows it's going to go over 40 days, can she start performing salah? See, uh, the rule in regards to Haidh, Nifas, etc., is it applies to what you see, not what you feel, like we discussed at the beginning. So, one is her gut feeling telling her something, or one is out of experience, she knows something. That doesn't change the rule of Nifas. It all comes down to what you see. What you feel may change, but what you see uh, is certain, and that is something can be followed. A feeling doesn't is not certain. A feeling is not certain, but what you see at that point in time is certain. So you have to follow what you see and not what you feel. Let's look at this in terms of numbers. So a habit, the first time she gave birth is 20B. This time it's 10B. She spots at the start of the month, 10 days. Then she is clean for 20 days, 20T within that 40-day period. And then towards the end of that nifas, she spots for 11 days, 11B. Now, you know, again, you've got a situation when you've got bloods like this here. How do you know you've got a situation? If you take the numbers and you add them all up together, because remember, everything within a nifas period is counted as one. So you take 10 plus 20 plus 11. That leaves you with 41 days. So what's the first rule? When you've got bloods that exceed 40 days in terms of nifas, you follow your previous habit. So here clearly it will go back to 20B and it won't go and change to 40B. So her nifas habit is 20B. So the first child that she had, it was 20B. And now the second child that she had is also 20B. Now, when she has a third child, for instance, and it doesn't exceed 10 days, then we know, okay, it possibly changes to 25 or 30 or whatever she sees in that period of time. And remember, there is no minimum for nifas. So technically speaking, let's say she only spotted on day one, right? The third time she had the child. She didn't spot anything whatsoever, right? Until 40 days passed. We say, listen, your nifas is how many days? 1 day. Your nifas can even be a moment. So there's no minimum to nifas. There's a maximum to nifas, but there's no minimum to nifas. Let's look at another example. This is an example where the blood exceeds 40 days, like the previous example. A habitual woman spots for 20 days. When she gave birth the next time, she spots for 1 day. Then she is clean for 30 days. Then she spots for 1 day. Then she is clean for 14 days. And then she spots for 1 day before a full 15 days has passed. Let's look at the calendar to understand this example. So she spots on day 1 of the calendar. All right. She is clean for the rest of the month. All right. She's actually clean for 30 days, a full 30 days. All right. And then she spots 1 day. All right. On day 2 of the next calendar month. Then again, she's clean for a full 14 days. You know, we've passed the 40-day period. But then day 41 on the calendar, day 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. In other words, in terms of hours, it hasn't exceeded a 15-day period from the first spotting. All right. So what situation do you have here? Remember, all the bloods within a nifas period is combined. But you also have a situation of a tuhar naqis here, where the blood hasn't exceeded 15 days, and the tuhar naqis combines bloods. So here, it is under 15 days. It will be combined with the last bloods. So from on the calendar day 2 to day 17, you combine all those bloods, and you have a situation where the blood has exceeded 40 days, like the previous example. I think if you look at the numbers, then we'll understand it more clearly. Let's look at the numbers, right? So 20B is a last habit or established habit for nifas. So she spots 1B, then she is clean 30T, and then she spots 1B, then she is clean 14T, and then she spots 1B. Right. So first day of the month, she spots 1B. Right. Then she's clean for 30 days. Then she spots 1B. How many days we've got here in total now? Remember, we combine all the bloods within the nifas period. We've got 32 days. 30 plus the 1B before it and the 1B after it, 32. Then we've got 14T. This is also appearing and occurring within the nifas period. So we take 32 plus 14, right? And this now gives us 46 days, right? 46 days. And before that full 15 days has passed, one more spotting, 1B, all right? So now, if you look at it, you would say, you know what, hey, there's no 15-day story after the 40 days because now it's 46. But then you have to go back to your calculation and see where this last spotting was to determine whether there's a tuhar and aqis here and whether the bloods have been combined. So you have to go back to your calculation and see where exactly that 1B occurred. And this 1B occurred here on day 2 of the second month's calendar, right? So it is a tuhar and aqis period. You combine the bloods and it will exceed the 40-day period. right? So now when it exceeds the 40-day period, she has to revert to her previous habit of what? A previous habit of nifas, which is 20B. So although she just spotted one day there at the start of the first month and just once on day 2 of the second month, because of that one day spotting before a full 15 days has passed, even though it's after the 40-day period, it now combines the blood and it shows her that she has to follow her last habit of 20 days. So it will be counted from day 1 of the first calendar to day 20 of the first calendar. She may have observed salah, fast, etc. Retrospectively, she has to do the calculation and make any qazas if necessary. So the result is the entire period is counted as one continuous flow of blood. And the second purity at the end is a deficient purity, tuhur naqis. As it exceeded 40 days, she reverts to her previous habit of 20 days, even though it ended in purity, tuhur. The 27 days in excess of her habit are days of istihada. When we look at the third example, we'll realize and see how a tuhar will separate. So remember, tuhar naqis doesn't separate, it combines. But a tuhar tam, a complete purity, whether valid or invalid, separates blood. So let's look at this example. This is actually an example where the blood doesn't exceed 40 days. So a habitual woman spots for 20 days. When she gave birth the next time, she spots for 5 days. Then she is clean for 34 days. And then she spots for 1 day. So at the start of the month, 5 days, right? Then she's clean for the whole month, right until day 40, all right? So on day 5 of this bleeding, this spotting, she would have said, you know what? My nifas has now changed from 20 to 5. But just spotting on that last day changes everything. So she spotted on that last day. We know bloods within a nifas all combined. So we'll actually say she spotted from day 1 to day 40 with some literal bloods and the rest or majority of them as legal bloods. So her habit has actually changed from 20 to 40. As the blood did not exceed 10 days, 40 days, all the blood is counted as nifas. Her new nifas habit is 40 days. So everything has changed here. Let's look at the number. 20B is a habit. She spots 5 at the start of the nifas. Then she is clean for 34 days. And then she spots for 1 more day. Right? You add all of them up, 5 plus 34 plus 1, that will give you 40. So the entire period is counted as 40B. Her habit has changed from 20 to 40. Let's look at this example where the blood does not exceed 40 days again. A habitual woman spots for 20 days. When she gave birth the next time, she spots for 18 days. Then she is clean for 22 days. And then she spots for 1 day. So 18 days she spots, and then she doesn't spot on the last 2 days. So now she realizes, you know what, it's changed from 20 to 18. And then she starts performing her salah. She makes ghusl, she starts performing her salah, start keeping fast, etc. And there, she waited right till day 40. And after day 40, she had 1 day of spotting. So now, has her habit changed from 20 to 18 or not? The result is, as a complete purity, tuhar tam exists after day 18. The blood from day 1 to day 18 is her new nifas habit. The blood after 22 days on day 41 is istihada. So, look, we don't have a tuhar naqis situation, bloods, under 15 days to combine the bloods. But there's clearly a tuhar tamia, and this one blood is occurring after that. Firstly, it's appearing after the 40-day period. And secondly, there is a tuhar tam of 15 clean days before that separates it, so we can't combine it. But if you throw a curveball and we add 1 day of blood on, let's say, day 1 of the second calendar month, right? Then we'll have a situation of a tuhar naqis, like one of the previous examples, and then we'll combine the bloods and say, you know what, it has exceeded 40 days, and therefore it's not 18 days anymore, it's actually 20 days, although she was clean on day 19 and 20 of the last month. So you just see that one blood, how it can change
the whole calculation. But here, that's not the case. There's a full tuhur tam and a complete purity that has separated the bloods. There's no combining of the bloods. Therefore, habit has changed from 20 to 18. In terms of numbers, 18B, 22T, and 1B, right? Again, you take the calculator and you add the numbers up together. 18 plus 22 plus 1, 41. That 1B has occurred after the 40-day period. And if you look at that, there's a 22T before that. It's clearly a tuhur tam. It separates the blood and it doesn't combine the bloods. But if, let's say, we had a 14T there and then the 1B instead of 22T, that would have combined the bloods and made it exceed the 40-day period, in which case she would have reverted to 20B and not 18B. Let's look at a third example where the blood doesn't exceed 40 days. A habitual woman spots for 20 days. When she gave birth, the next time she spots for 1 day. Then she is clean for 34 days. Then she spots for 1 day. Then she is clean for 15 days. Then she spots for 1 day. Let's look at the calendar. First day she spots. She's clean for the rest of the month for 34 days. And then on day 35, she spots. Of the tuhur, obviously. Right? So now she had a spotting at the start of the last month, and now she has a spotting on the 6th day of the second month. Right? She'll say, okay, retrospectively, this from day 1 to day 30 to day 6 of the second calendar month, this entire period is counted as nifas, right? At that point in time, and then at that she'll do the calculations, etc., and determine what's counted as haidh and what isn't. So now she would have said, you know what, it's changed from 20 to this number of days, right? And then she would have to, do the calculation and make the qazas. However, after day 10, in other words, 40 days has passed, and on day 22 of the second calendar month, she has one spotting there, right? So the result is, as a complete purity tuhur tam exists after day 36. Day 1 to day 36 is her new habit. The blood after 15 days on day 52 is istihada. So now, because we've got a tuhur tam from day 36 right till that blood on day 20, that blood that's occurring on day 22 of the calendar month, there's actually a full 15 days between them, between this blood on day 22 and the last blood on day 6 of the calendar month. Because there's a full tuhur tam, it separates the bloods. It separates the bloods. We're not going to say now it exceeded 40 days and she must revert to 20 days. We say no. Her habit has changed from 20 to 36. Let's throw a curveball here. If the blood was on day 15 on the calendar, then it would have been a tuhur naqis and combined the bloods, in which case it would have exceeded a 40-day period, and in which case she won't follow 36 days, she'll follow 20 days, because now it has exceeded the 40-day period. But this has occurred after tuhur tam. So that's the important point. A tuhur naqis is such an important rule that no one actually uses it and no one actually gives it any consideration, talking across the board. But this affects the overall calculations. People usually just count 3, 10, and 15. So 3 days haidh is minimum, 10 days is maximum, and 15 days is a separator. And they'll use the same thing with regards to nifas. There's no minimum, but there's a maximum of 40, and then there's a separator of 15. But no one gives this consideration of tuhur naqis as an overarching rule, that it's a combiner of bloods and it can affect this whole calculation of 3, 10, and even 40. So it's a very important rule. Let's look at it in terms of number. 20B is the habit, but then she spots 1B, 34T, 1B, 15T, and 1B. All right. So let's use the calculator again. You've got 1 plus 34 plus 1. That's already 36. Right. And then you got a 15T and then a 1B. Because you got a 1B after that 15T, you need to determine whether that is going to be combined with the 36 bloods, literal and legal, in total, or will that be counted separate? So now, because we got a 15T before that, automatically we know that, listen, this is now a separator, it's not a combiner. But let's say if it was 14T and 1B before a full 15 days has passed, then we say, listen, we've got a combiner situation here. It has exceeded 40 days, and therefore she reverts to 20B, and she won't follow 36B. But in this case, because we got a tuhur tam separating it, we will follow 36B and not 20B. Yes, so the blood after 15T will be istihada, since it's less than 3 days. If it was 3 days, then it will be haidh. So yes, we know the rule that that 1 day, we're just talking about the 1 day of blood. But if, let's say, after that 15T, you had a minimum of 3, then we'll say that, hold on here, this has now changed to valid blood. So you'll actually have, so let's say the past tuhar was 20 days, right? So now remember the rule of a tuhar. It must be 15 days and more. It mustn't be mixed with any invalid bloods, and it must occur between 2 valid bloods. This is a perfect example of showing the situation where it occurs or appears between 2 valid bloods. So because we counted 1B 34T and 1B as 36B, her nifas period, the 15D we count as a separator because it's a full 15, and the 1B we're counting it now for our calculation as istihada. But if it goes up to 3 days and more, we can count this 15T as now a new valid tuhar, because it has occurred, firstly, it's not mixed with invalid bloods, and secondly, it has occurred between 2 valid bloods, between a nifas, and now it's occurring between a haidh. That's valid bloods. So if she had a past tuhar of 20T, for instance, it would now change to 15T. And that would also show us that the place of habit has changed, because now it has been reduced from 20 to 15T. So the place of habit will definitely change. Yes, if then in that case you got excess blood, then it's possible that the place of habit wouldn't change, and you'll count all those bloods in the place of habit as haidh, and you'll still have to follow the past valid tuhar, etc. All those rules will come later. But just to answer your question, yes, if it reaches the 3 days threshold of valid bloods, then it will change from istihada to haidh. Okay, let's come to some rules of a beginner woman, right? So the rule of a beginner woman is that, firstly, she has no habit. She has a default habit of haidh, which is 10 days, and a default habit of tuhar, which is 20 days. This is a case where there is continuous flow of blood. So this is her default habit. So a beginner woman spots for a moment on day 1. Then she is clean for 14 days. Then she spots for a moment on day 15. This is an example of haidh now. We discussed nifas in regard, we discussed actually haidh and nifas in regards to a habitual woman. Now we're discussing haidh in regards to a beginner woman. So she spots on day 1, right? Let's say she's 9 years of age, or she's 10 years of age, whatever the case is, and then she spots on that day 1, right? Then she's fully clean, and then before a full 15 days has passed, she spots again. She's discussing these things with her mother. Her mother will tell her that, listen, no, you only spotted 1 day there, not counted as haidh. Whereas this is a tuhur naqis situation, and we know the rule of a tuhur naqis, it combines all the bloods. So the blood from day 1 right up till day 15, before a full 15 days has passed, is counted as one continuous flow of blood. So when we do that, what's the result? It results in that going over 10 days. When it goes over 10 days, what do? You follow the default habit of haidh for a beginner woman, and you count from the first spotting right up till day 10 as haidh. So if she read the salahs on those days, not counted. If she kept fast, it has to be repeated, so on and so forth. So that is now established as her 10-day habit for Haidh. And that spotting before full 15 days has passed will be counted as istihada. This shows that a beginner woman doesn't have to have continuous flow of blood. It can be a once-off thing. She just spots, and then she spots on another day. So again, see the importance of the Tuhur Naqis period, how it affects the whole calculation. So the result is the entire period is counted as one continuous flow of blood, as it is a deficient purity Tuhur Naqis. Day 1, which is the day of blood, to day 10, which is now a day of purity, is counted as Haidh. That entire period is counted as Haidh. So it will be counted as mature baligha from day 1. So the question arises, when is she baligha? Do you count it from day 10? Or where do you count it from? So retrospectively, we'll say she became baligha on that day onwards. So a girl can become baligha by experiencing her first Haidh. Let's say she didn't have any of the other conditions fulfilled, the wet dream, etc. But it's the first time she's experiencing Haidh. So you don't count it from day 3. You don't count it from day 10. You count it from day 1, because retrospectively the Haidh started on day 1 of that month. So that answers your question in regards to from which point onwards do you count a girl as baligha from. Some people think it's day 3. No, it's not from day 3. The Haidh actually retrospectively is counted from day 1 onwards. So the same example in terms of numbers, 1B, 14T, 1B. Right? Before full 15 days has passed, a Tuhur Naqis situation, we combine all the bloods, it's exceeded the 10-day period, she must follow the default habit of 10B. And from the first day onwards, she will be counted as a baligha. Remember, it's just the first time that she experiences this. The following month, we're not going to count her as beginner. She's counted as a mu'tada. She's now a habitual woman because she got an established habit. Although the 10B now flows into the habitual woman situation. We know the definition. She must experience one valid Haidh or one valid nifas, or she must experience basically any of them. And when she experiences any of them, then she is counted as a beginner woman. Sorry, as a mu'tada, a habitual woman. If she has 16T in between 2 spotting of 1 day each, will she not be baligha? So let's take the same example, right? And switch it around. 1B, she spotted. 15T, she's clean. And then 1B, she spotted. Right? Because you've got a full Tuhur tam in between them, you cannot combine the bloods. When you cannot combine the bloods, you're not going to count it as continuous flow of blood. It will just be 1 day of istihada before and 1 day of istihada after. And therefore, we won't be able to count her as a baligha from the first point or the first spotting onwards, because you got a Tuhur tam. Again, you see the importance of the Tuhur Naqis situation and how it can change the whole determination and calculation. Okay, let's look at an example of a beginner woman in terms of nifas. So a beginner woman gives birth and spots for a moment, then she spots on day 40. So she's got no habit, right? She never experienced a Haidh before, and then she fell pregnant, and she gave birth. So she spots for a moment, just when she was in hospital. That's it. No spotting whatsoever thereafter. And then she spots on day 40. All right. So we know everything or any form of tuhar within a nifas is counted as one, from the first bloods to the last bloods within that period of time. So here the entire period is counted as one continuous flow of blood. Day 1 to day 40 is nifas. All right. So she would have, stopped on that day and made ghusl, etc. She doesn't know exactly what's the days of habit, because she doesn't have a continuous flow of blood. So she'll continue as normal until she spots on day 10 of the second calendar month. In other words, day 40. Now she knows, okay, I've got the spotting within this period. Everything is counted as nifas. Retrospectively, she'll have to do the calculations and make the qaza accordingly. And if the question arises, when does she count as baligha? Obviously, now, if she doesn't experience a haze or she doesn't experience a wet dream, then she'll go by age in terms of number. The Muftabi Qawl is 15 years, right? When she passes that 15 years in terms of an Islamic month, automatically will count as baligha from that point onwards because she hasn't experienced a valid haze. So let's look at this in terms of number 1B, 38T, and 1B. Basically, right at the start and right at the end, she was clean for the rest of it. It's 40B. That's her habit. Going forward, she'll be categorized as a habitual woman, a mu'tada, and a habit is 40 days. Second example, beginner woman gives birth and spots on day 1 and day 30. Then she spots on day 45 before a full 15 days of tuhar has passed. So day 1 she spots, she's clean for the rest of the month, but then on day 30 of the month she spots again. So now we know, okay, from day 1 to day 30, everything is counted as nifas, right? But then she's clean for the rest of the month. And before a full 15 days has passed, she spots again. So like the previous examples that we spoke about and discussed in regards to a habitual woman, you can experience a tuhar and naqis at the end, even if you get bloods after day 40. And in that case, you will combine the bloods, which would mean that the bloods have actually exceeded 40 days. Now, we know the rule. When it exceeds 40 days, you follow your last habit. In regards to a beginner woman, she's got no previous habit. So what does she follow? She follows the default habit, which is now 40 days. Now you see, some women, they mix up this thing here and they say, you know what, because it exceeded 40 days, she must just follow 40. It doesn't work like that. It only applies to who? It only applies to a beginner woman because she's got no default habit. If you've got a habit of nifas, and then you will have to follow what? You have to follow your previous number. So let's look at a hypothetical scenario. A woman is 30 years of age or 40 years of age. She never experienced any fast before. Now she has a child. She's give birth, and the blood exceeds 40 days. What does she follow? Right? Technically, she's counted as a beginner woman. If it exceeds 40, she must follow 40. But if she's not a beginner woman, she has a habit before, she'll follow that habit. So remember, this is in terms of a woman experiencing the nifas the first time. Okay, so the entire period from day 30 to day 45 is counted as one continuous flow of blood, as it is a deficient purity tuhar naqis. The period of nifas is 40 days. The period after day 40 is istihada, so that one spotting on day 15 before the full 15 days has passed is counted as istihada. Right? So you still have to count a minimum of 15 to you can't say now, okay, now let's see day 15, 16, 17, maybe we can count that as haze. You can't do that. Because what's the rule? The rule is that you have to have a separator between the bloods of a minimum of 15 days at tuhar tam, regardless of the tuhar tam being valid or invalid, to actually count the next haze. Let's look at it in terms of number 1B, 28T, 1B, 14T, and 1B. Sit with your calculator there and you calculate 1 plus 28 plus 1 plus 14 plus 1. You got 45 days here. Now, you can have a 15-day period after a 40-day period, provided that you've got bloods within a 15-day period, all right, from the last bloods in the nifas period. So if you've got that, you'll combine the bloods and it will exceed the 40-day period, in which case a beginner woman will follow 40 and a habitual woman will follow her last habit. In these examples of the mu'tada, would she be counted as baligh from the determination of her pregnancy or from the day she gives birth, assuming she is younger than 15 lunar months? Yes, so let's say it's a very unfortunate situation where a girl has fallen pregnant due to zina or due to whatever reason. Um, and before that period of 15 lunar years, she falls pregnant. She never experienced a haze before. She never experienced a wet dream before, so on and so forth. There's no, in other words, there's no other indication from her being baligha. Then the time she gives birth and the time we determine the date of nifas, will count her baligha from that day onwards, even though 15 lunar months have not passed. Or sorry, 15 lunar years have not passed. So that's the definition of a baligha. A baligha becomes baligha when she experiences either of these things: a valid haze, wet dream, or she's impregnated. In fact, this will change the whole situation. It won't be the time she gives birth. Uh, it will be the time she's impregnated. If a habitual woman's haze exceeds 10 days, she takes last month's haze as a habit, and the rest is istihada. Then if she does not have 15T until her next haze, does it change? So yes, if it exceeds 10 days, she'll follow the last number, right? The rest will be istihada. Obviously, there has to be a 15 days, 15 tuhar period, tuhar tam, separating the bloods in order for her to count the next haze. So any bloods that she experiences within that 15, remember the 15 is a strict rule between bloods. That 15 doesn't change in any way. So like I explained before, there's two 15s that we're looking at more or less. One is a separator and one is a combiner. The separator doesn't change. That is a strict rule. You have to have a separator between bloods. Anything experienced in between there, that would be istihada. The only overarching one is that tuhur naqis, when you look from the first spotting right till day 15, from the first spotting. After that, your full 15 days you must have, regardless of the situation, in order to count another haze. So let's look at the last example. A beginner woman gives birth and spots on day 1 and day 30. Then she spots on day 45 after. Remember all the examples that we gave so far, or rather the last few examples that we gave was within the 15. This is after a full 15 days of Tuhar has passed. So day 1 she spots, she's clean for the rest of the month. Day 30 she spots again, right? Then she is clean for a full 15-day period, and after 15 days she spots 1 day. So now we don't have a situation of Tuhre Naqis, deficient purity. We got a situation of Tuhre Tam, right? So the result is the period of Nifas is 30 days. The period that followed is a complete purity, Tuhre Tam, and separates the bloods. The blood spotted in the purity is istihada. So only difference between this example and the last example, the spotting occurred within the 15-day period of Tuhre Naqis. This year, it's spotting occurred after the 15-day period. So we know that if you've got a separator in between, the blood is not combined. So now it has actually changed, or rather, the habit that she'll follow is 30 days. We won't say that it exceeded 40 days and therefore it's 40. It's actually 30 now because there's a separator in between. Look at the example in terms of number: 1B, 28T, 1B, 15T, and then 1B. So again, you take your calendar or your calculator and you add up 1 plus 28 plus 1, right, plus 15 plus 1. You got a 46-day calculation here. And if we add 1B, 28T, and 1B together, then obviously you've got a 30-day calculation. And when you got the 30-day calculation, you know, you only got 10 days left to actually work out a nifas. But then you got a 15T. As soon as you got a 15T, you know, okay, we've got no problems here. Any bloods that comes thereafter, we know that will be istihada. It won't be a combining of bloods to now exceed 40 days. Got a separator, right, it's now 30 days. But if it was 14T and then 1B, we say, okay, we've got a slight situation of Tuhre Naqis. we can combine the bloods, we'll combine the bloods, and then it will exceed 40 days. For beginner woman, it will actually be 40 and not 30. But in this example, there's clearly a separator, so it's not 40, it is 30. That brings us to the end of today's class. And in the next class, we'll continue with another subject, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khaira. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.